A Hollywood legend worth millions sat outside his own restaurant in a worn-out pickup truck, and inside, something was very wrong. A young waitress raising her sick brother alone was losing her tips every single day. A widow working double shifts never saw the money she earned. And a former soldier, already fighting battles in his own mind, was being mocked instead of supported. But the most shocking part? This was all happening inside a business built on fairness, built by the very man sitting outside, watching it all unfold. And today, he was about to uncover the truth. Rain tapped steadily against the windshield as Keanu Reeves adjusted the brim of his faded trucker cap, lowering it just enough to hide his identity. Today, he wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't the face people recognized from movies or headlines. Today, he was just Mike, an ordinary man passing through town, looking for a simple breakfast. The diner in front of him, Second Chance Diner number 14, looked like any other roadside restaurant. Warm yellow lights glowed through the windows, and the scent of coffee and fried bacon drifted faintly into the rainy air. On the surface, everything looked normal, maybe even welcoming. But Keanu had learned long ago that appearances could lie. This particular location had been bothering him for months. On paper, it was performing exceptionally well. Profits were up. Customer traffic was steady. Reports from management were flawless. But behind those perfect numbers, something didn't feel right. Employee turnover was unusually high, almost 3 times higher than other locations. Customer reviews hinted at tension among staff. Internal surveys showed low morale, but those concerns were always brushed off by regional management as temporary issues. It didn't make sense. And Keanu had built his entire business on one principle: if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Taking a slow breath, he stepped out of the truck and pulled his jacket tighter against the cold morning air. Rain dotted his shoulders as he walked toward the entrance and pushed the door open. The soft chime of the bell echoed through the diner, but no one turned to look at him. That was exactly what he wanted. He wasn't here to be recognized. He was here to observe. Inside, the diner was moderately busy. Around 30 customers sat scattered across booths and tables. The smell of fresh pancakes mixed with strong coffee filled the space. It should have felt comforting. Familiar, but within seconds, Keanu noticed the first crack. A hostess approached him with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her greeting felt rushed, mechanical, as if she had repeated it too many times without meaning it. She grabbed a menu, led him silently to a booth near the back, and walked away before he could even respond properly. No warmth. No connection. Just routine. Keanu slid into the booth, placing himself strategically near the kitchen where he could see everything: the dining area, the register, and part of the staff interactions. Years of experience had trained him to notice details most people ignored. And what he saw next confirmed his instincts. 2 servers stood near the counter, casually scrolling through their phones, occasionally glancing at their tables with clear disinterest. Meanwhile, one waitress moved rapidly across the floor, handling multiple tables at once. She carried heavy trays, poured coffee, took orders, and managed customer complaints, all without stopping. The contrast was impossible to miss. His attention stayed on her. Her name tag read Emma. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, but her eyes carried a kind of exhaustion that didn't match her age. Still, she smiled at every customer. Not a fake smile, the kind that's forced, but a genuine one, even if it cost her energy she clearly didn't have. After a few minutes, she approached his table, slightly out of breath but composed. "Good morning, sir. Sorry for the wait. Can I get you some coffee?" Her voice was polite, steady. "Professional," Keanu nodded. "Black," he said simply. As she poured, he watched closely. Her hands were steady, but her movements were fast, too fast. Like someone constantly racing against time. "Busy morning," he said casually. She gave a small smile. "It usually is." That was all she said. Nothing more. But her tone suggested there was more beneath the surface. As she walked away, Keanu leaned back slightly, watching the rhythm of the diner. Patterns began to form. Emma handled most of the tables. The other servers avoided responsibility. And every time a customer was ready to pay at Emma's table, one of the other servers would step in to process the transaction. At first, it seemed like teamwork, then it happened again and again. Too consistent to be random. Keanu's expression remained calm, but inside, something shifted. This wasn't inefficiency. This was controlled. Organized. Intentional. As his breakfast arrived, perfectly prepared, despite the chaos, he decided to test the situation. "You seem to be doing most of the work around here," he said lightly. Emma paused for just a fraction of a second, then she smiled again. "Just part of the job." "Tips must be good then," he added. This time, her smile faded just slightly. "Not really," she said quietly. Before he could ask more, a sharp voice called her from across the room. "Emma." "Table 12. She flinched almost imperceptibly. Then quickly nodded. "Sorry," she said, and rushed away. Keanu watched her go, his eyes narrowing slightly beneath the cap. That reaction wasn't normal. As he finished his meal, he kept observing. Watching every interaction. Every exchange. Every subtle detail that others ignored. And with every passing minute, one thing became clearer and clearer. Something was wrong in this diner, not just small problems. Not just bad management, something deeper, something systematic. When he finally stood up to leave, he placed cash on the table, more than enough, and paused for a moment. He already suspected what might happen to it. Walking back out into the rain, he climbed into his truck and sat there, staring through the window at the diner. From the outside, it looked like any normal place, but now he knew better, and this was only the beginning. Because over the next 72 hours, everything he believed about his own business was about to be shattered. The next morning, Keanu Reeves returned to the diner before the breakfast rush had fully begun, the sky still gray from the night before. His disguise exactly the same, faded jeans, flannel shirt, and the same worn trucker cap pulled low over his face. This time, he didn't just want to observe, he wanted answers. The bell chimed as he stepped inside, and once again, no one recognized him. The same dull energy lingered in the air, the same imbalance in effort already beginning to show even before the restaurant filled up. Emma was already working, moving quickly between tables, setting up coffee, organizing orders, preparing for the wave of customers that would soon hit. Meanwhile, Tyler leaned lazily near the register, chatting with another employee, completely unbothered. Nothing had changed. If anything, it felt worse now that Keanu knew what to look for. He took his usual seat near the back, giving himself a full view of the floor, and within minutes, the pattern started repeating itself like a script. Emma took orders, delivered food, handled customers, but whenever a bill came, Tyler or another favorite employee would step in at just the right moment to process the payment. It was subtle enough that a normal customer wouldn't question it, but obvious enough to someone paying attention. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly. This wasn't random. This was controlled theft. When Emma approached his table, she looked even more tired than the day before, dark circles more visible now, her smile thinner, like she was running out of energy to fake it. "Morning," she said softly, pouring his coffee before he even asked. "Morning," he replied, watching her closely. "You always start this early?" She nodded. "Double shift today." "That sounds rough." She shrugged slightly. "It is what it is." But her tone carried something deeper, resignation, not acceptance. Keanu leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "You ever think about leaving?" For a brief moment, her composure cracked. Just a second. Then it was gone. "I can't," she said quietly. "Not right now." Before he could respond, the kitchen bell rang sharply, and she was gone again, pulled back into the chaos. Keanu sat back, processing that one sentence. "I can't." That wasn't just about a job. That was about survival. As the morning progressed, the diner filled up, and the pressure intensified. Emma was now handling more than a dozen tables, moving non-stop, while Tyler and the others continued to take advantage of the system. That's when Keanu noticed something new. An elderly man walked in slowly, wearing a worn jacket and a military veteran's cap. His movements were careful, measured, like someone who had seen more than most people ever would. Emma's entire expression changed when she saw him. "Morning, Ben," she called out warmly, her voice suddenly lighter, more genuine. "Your usual?" The man smiled faintly. "You already know." Keanu watched as she led him to a booth, treating him with a level of kindness that stood out even in the middle of her exhaustion. There was history there. Trust. Something real. Curious, Keanu kept an eye on the interaction. Then ate quietly, occasionally exchanging a few words with Emma when she passed by, and when he finished, he placed cash on the table, clearly visible. A generous tip. Then he stood, nodded to Emma, and slowly made his way toward the exit. And just like the day before, Tyler appeared. Almost instantly. He picked up the money, walked to the register, and after a quick motion that looked routine to anyone not paying attention, slipped part of it away. When Emma returned moments later, the tip was gone. Or at least, most of it was. She paused for just a second, staring at the table, her expression falling ever so slightly before she forced herself to move on. That was it. That was the confirmation Keanu needed. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was proof. And it wasn't small. This was systematic exploitation happening right in front of customers, hidden behind routine. As the crowd thinned later in the morning, Keanu made his move. When Emma came to refill his coffee, he spoke quietly. "That man. Ben. He seems like a regular." She nodded. "Every day. He tips well?" There was a pause. A long one this time. She looked around carefully before leaning in slightly. "He tries to," she said softly. "But it doesn't always reach me." Keanu's expression remained calm, but inside, something burned hotter. "How long has that been happening?" he asked. Emma hesitated. You could see the conflict in her eyes, fear versus honesty. Then, finally, honesty won. "Since the new manager took over," she whispered. "About 2 years. And no one's reported it?" She let out a quiet, bitter breath. "To who?" she said. "The system goes through them. Complaints go through them. Everything goes through them." She shook her head slightly. "If you speak up, you lose your hours, or your job." Keanu didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. The truth was clear now. This wasn't just theft. It was control. Fear. Silence. Before he could ask more, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. Every head turned. A man in a server uniform stood frozen near the doorway, a tray shattered at his feet. His breathing was heavy, uneven, his eyes wide like he wasn't fully there. For a moment, no one moved. Then laughter broke the silence. "Tyler." And then the manager, Vince, stepping forward with a smirk. "Here we go again," he said loudly, shaking his head like it was entertainment. The man, James, didn't respond. He just stood there, trying to regain control, clearly overwhelmed. "Maybe this job's not for you," Vince added coldly. "We can't have you scaring customers." Keanu felt something shift inside him, something deeper than anger. This wasn't just unfair. This was cruel. Emma rushed forward immediately, kneeling beside James, helping him gather the broken pieces. "You're okay," she said gently. "Just breathe." Vince's expression hardened. "Emma, back to work." She hesitated, just for a second. Then stood and walked away, but the look in her eyes said everything. Keanu sat there in silence, his coffee untouched now, his mind racing. In just 2 days, he had seen enough to know the truth. This diner wasn't broken by accident. It had been turned into something else entirely. Something that went against everything he had built. And now, there was only one question left. How far did it go? Because if this was happening here, it might not be the only place. As he stood up to leave, he took one last look around the diner, the overworked staff, the careless management, the quiet suffering hidden beneath routine, and made a decision. He wasn't just going to fix this. He was going to expose it. Completely. And when he did, no one involved would be able to hide behind it ever again. That night, sitting alone in his hotel room, Keanu Reeves couldn't shake what he had seen at the diner, because it wasn't just about numbers anymore. It wasn't just about reports or performance metrics. It had become personal in a way he hadn't expected, dragging him back to a memory he had carried for most of his life. He was 10 years old again, sitting quietly on a stool in a small diner in Toronto, watching his mother work behind the counter, her movements quick but careful, her smile kind but tired, the kind of smile people wear when they don't have the luxury to stop. He remembered the way customers treated her, some with respect, but many without it, and one moment stood out more clearly than the rest. A man in an expensive suit had snapped his fingers at her like she was invisible, demanding coffee as if it were his right, complaining about everything, never once seeing her as a person. And when he left, he dropped a few coins on the table like that was enough to pay for her time, her effort, her dignity. Keanu remembered the anger he felt as a child, the confusion, the helplessness. That night, walking home in the rain, he had asked his mother why she didn't say anything, why she allowed herself to be treated that way, and her answer had shaped everything he would later build. Our job doesn't define our worth, she had told him softly, kneeling down to meet his eyes, rain falling around them just like it had been falling outside the diner earlier that day. But the way people treat others tells you everything about who they are. She had placed her hand on his cheek and said something he would never forget. If you ever have power one day, promise me you'll use it to protect people, not take advantage of them. Sitting in that quiet hotel room now, decades later, Keanu realized something that made his chest tighten. Somewhere along the way, that promise had been broken, not by him directly, but under his name, inside something he had created. And that made it his responsibility. The next morning, he returned to the diner earlier than before, determined not just to observe, but to understand the full extent of what was happening. The atmosphere hadn't changed. If anything, the tension felt heavier now that he knew what to look for. Emma was already there again, working like nothing had happened, carrying the same exhaustion, the same quiet determination. But this time, Keanu paid closer attention to her beyond the surface. The way she checked her phone between tables, not casually, but with concern. The way her smile faded the moment she turned away from customers. The way she hesitated before responding to certain questions, like she was constantly measuring what she could and couldn't say. When she finally came to his table, he kept his voice calm. "You worked yesterday too," he said. She nodded. "I work most days." "That doesn't sound sustainable." She gave a small, almost humorless smile. "It doesn't have to be. It just has to work for now." Keanu studied her for a moment before asking gently, "You said you can't leave, why?" This time, she didn't deflect immediately. She looked down at her notepad, gripping it slightly tighter, then spoke quietly. "My little brother," she said. "He's 10. He has severe asthma. Medication isn't cheap." She paused, swallowing before continuing. "After our parents died, it's just been me." The words hung in the air, heavy and real. "I was supposed to finish nursing school," she added, almost as if saying it out loud made it feel further away. "Just one semester left, but now." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Keanu felt that same anger rise again, stronger now, sharper, because this wasn't just about unfair tips. This was about someone's future being stolen piece by piece. "And the tips?" he asked quietly. Emma let out a slow breath. "That's what was supposed to help me," she said. "But most of it never reaches me." "How much are we talking about?" There was hesitation again. Then finally, "Hundreds a month, maybe more." Keanu leaned back slightly, processing that. Hundreds a month wasn't just lost income. For someone in her situation, that was survival money. Rent, medicine, education, hope. And it was being taken. As Emma walked away, he noticed something else happening across the room. Dorothy had just started her shift. She was older, clearly experienced, moving with the kind of efficiency that only comes from years of doing the same work. But there was something else there too, fatigue, deep and settled, like it had been building for a long time. Keanu watched as she handled table after table without complaint, just like Emma. But unlike the others, she was given the worst sections, the loudest areas, the least desirable tables. And just like Emma, whenever payments were involved, someone else stepped in. Same pattern. Different victim. Later, as the morning slowed down, Keanu stepped outside briefly, needing air, needing space to think. That's when he saw Ben again, standing near the entrance, lighting a cigarette with steady hands. "You're back," Ben said without looking at him. Keanu gave a slight nod. "Trying to understand this place." Ben let out a dry chuckle. "Then you're asking the right questions." Keanu hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Something's wrong here." Ben turned to look at him properly now, his sharp eyes studying him carefully. "You noticed that too, huh?" "More than that," Keanu replied quietly. "I think it's worse than it looks." Ben took a slow drag before exhaling. "You have no idea," he said. There was a pause. Then he added, "This place used to be different." "What changed?" Ben's expression darkened slightly. "Management," he said simply. "Everything started going downhill when Vince took over." Keanu felt his suspicions tightening into certainty. "People tried to speak up?" he asked. Ben laughed bitterly. "Of course they did. And now they're gone." "And the ones who stayed?" Ben looked back toward the diner window. "They stopped fighting," he said quietly. "Sometimes survival feels more important than fairness." Those words hit harder than anything Keanu had heard so far. Because they weren't just about this diner. They were about something much bigger. A system where good people stayed silent because they had no choice. Where doing the right thing felt like a risk instead of a standard. Keanu nodded slowly, his decision becoming clearer with every second. "That's about to change," he said. Ben raised an eyebrow slightly. "You sure about that?" Keanu looked back at the diner, his expression calm but firm. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I am." Because now, this wasn't just an investigation anymore. This was personal. And whatever was happening inside that diner wasn't going to last much longer. That evening, sitting in a quiet hotel room overlooking the city, Keanu Reeves stopped observing and started acting, because by now, there was no doubt left in his mind. What was happening inside that diner wasn't mismanagement. It was a calculated system of exploitation, and if he wanted to stop it properly, he needed more than suspicion. He needed proof that no one could deny. He pulled out his phone and made a call he rarely made unless something was serious. "Rebecca, I need you in Austin. Tonight." There was no hesitation on the other end. Within hours, Rebecca, head of internal investigations, was on a flight, and by midnight, she sat across from him, her laptop open, reviewing everything he had gathered so far. "Tell me everything," she said. And he did. From the uneven workload to the tip manipulation, from Emma's situation to what he had witnessed with Ben's cash tip being taken, from the hostile behavior of the manager to the humiliation of James. As he spoke, Rebecca's expression shifted from curiosity to concern to quiet anger. "If this is accurate," she said finally, "this isn't just a policy violation, this is fraud." Keanu nodded. "That's what I thought." Rebecca began digging immediately, pulling up internal systems, payroll logs, POS records, everything connected to that location. What she found made the situation even worse. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward him. "There's a classification system here that doesn't exist in any official company policy." Keanu leaned closer. "What does it do?" It reroutes digital tips, she replied. Certain employees are marked differently, and that changes where the money goes. Keanu's expression hardened. And who controls it? Rebecca didn't even need to check again. The manager, and one other account. Let me guess, Keanu said quietly. Tyler. Rebecca nodded. Most of the digital tips are being redirected to him. For a moment, the room went silent. Then Keanu asked the question that mattered most. How much? Rebecca typed quickly, calculating. Conservatively? Over $40,000 in the last several months. Keanu leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose. This wasn't small. This wasn't accidental. This was organized theft. And it had been happening for a long time. What about complaints? He asked. Rebecca clicked into another system. That's the interesting part, she said. There are records of complaints, but none of them ever reached higher management. Intercepted? Exactly. She turned the laptop again. All marked as resolved locally. Keanu didn't need her to explain what that meant. It meant control. It meant no one outside that diner had any idea what was really happening inside it. It meant people had tried to speak up, and had been silenced. What about the employee? James, he asked. Rebecca's expression shifted again. I found something, she said carefully. There's an incident report about a panic episode, but it's labeled as misconduct. Keanu frowned. That's not right. It gets worse, she added quietly. There was a video, shared internally. It looks like someone recorded him during one of those episodes. Keanu's jaw tightened. Who shared it? Rebecca didn't hesitate. Tyler. For a few seconds, Keanu said nothing. But the silence wasn't calm anymore. It was controlled anger. The kind that builds before something breaks. Download everything, he said finally. All of it. Rebecca nodded. Already doing it. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights, but his focus wasn't there. It was back at the diner. At Emma. At Dorothy. At James. At every moment he had witnessed over the past 2 days. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we go back. Rebecca looked up. As Mike? He shook his head slowly. No. He turned back toward her, his expression completely different now. No disguise, no hesitation, no doubt. As me. The next morning, they returned to the diner one last time before the confrontation, this time still undercover, but more focused than ever. Rebecca played the role of his daughter, asking questions, observing interactions, confirming everything firsthand. And everything matched. The same patterns. The same behavior. The same system. It was airtight now. By the time they left, there was no room for denial. Everything was documented. Everything was proven. Back in the parking lot, Keanu sat quietly in his truck for a moment, gripping the steering wheel slightly tighter than usual. Rebecca looked at him. You ready? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked through the diner window one more time, watching Emma move quickly between tables, watching Dorothy carry another tray, watching James carefully navigate the floor, trying not to draw attention. Then he spoke. I built this place for people like them, he said. Not for people like Vince. Rebecca nodded. Then let's fix it. Keanu's eyes hardened slightly, not with anger anymore, but with certainty. No, he said, we're not just fixing it. He opened the truck door and stepped out, the morning sun cutting through the clouds for the first time in days. We're ending it. Because what was about to happen next wasn't just a correction. It wasn't just a management change. It was a complete exposure. And by the time it was over, no one inside that diner would ever forget it. Friday morning arrived with an unusual sense of calm, the kind that often comes right before everything changes. and inside Second Chance Diner number 14, it seemed like just another busy day, customers filling tables, coffee being poured, orders shouted into the kitchen, and no one having the slightest idea that within minutes, everything they thought was normal was about to fall apart. At exactly 8:45 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot, drawing curious glances from a few customers near the windows, but most people ignored it, assuming it was just another group passing through. Then the doors opened. One by one, sharply dressed individuals stepped inside, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere, their posture serious, their expressions focused, like people who weren't there for breakfast. Conversations began to fade. Forks paused mid-air. Something felt off. And then, walking in behind them, was Keanu Reeves. But this time, there was no trucker cap. No flannel shirt. No disguise. He wore a tailored suit, his posture confident, his presence impossible to ignore. For a moment, not the customers. Not the staff. Not even the manager. Emma, who had been pouring coffee, froze completely, the pot slipping slightly in her hand as recognition hit her like a wave. "That's..." she whispered, unable to finish the sentence. Vincent Crawford stepped out of his office, his usual confident smile already forming, until he saw who had just walked in. And in that instant, everything changed. His expression faltered. Just slightly. But enough. "Mr. Reeves," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite land. "What an unexpected visit." Keanu didn't smile back. "Clearly," he replied calmly. The tone of his voice alone was enough to silence the entire room. The corporate team spread out quietly, positioning themselves throughout the diner, not aggressively, but with clear intention. This wasn't random. This was planned. Customers looked around, confused but curious, sensing something serious was about to happen. Keanu stepped forward into the center of the room, his presence commanding attention without needing to raise his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, addressing both staff and customers, "I apologize for the interruption, but what's about to happen here can't wait." The room went completely silent. "I am Keanu Reeves, owner of this company," he continued, "and over the past few days, I've been here, not as myself, but as a customer." A ripple of shock moved through the staff. Emma's eyes widened. Tyler's face went pale. Vince stood frozen, his mind clearly racing. "What I discovered during that time," Keanu went on, "was something I cannot ignore." He opened a folder in his hand, removing a set of documents. "For months, possibly longer, this location has been operating under a system designed to exploit its own employees." Vince stepped forward quickly. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There hasn't," Keanu interrupted, his voice still calm, but now sharper. "There's been theft." The word hit the room like a shockwave. Customers exchanged glances. Staff stood frozen. "Digital tips have been redirected," Keanu continued, holding up the documents. "Cash tips have been intercepted. Complaints have been buried. And employees have been manipulated into silence." Tyler shifted uncomfortably. Vince's composure began to crack. "That's a serious accusation," Vince said, his tone tightening. "It's not an accusation," Keanu replied. "It's a fact." Rebecca stepped forward, holding a tablet, turning it so Vince and Tyler could see. "Transaction logs. System records. Internal communications," she said clearly. "All verified." Tyler's face drained of color. "Dad," he muttered under his breath, panic creeping in. Vince shot him a warning look, but it was too late. The control he had built so carefully was slipping. "Over $40,000, Keanu said, his voice steady. "That's how much has been taken from employees in this location alone." A gasp echoed somewhere in the diner. Emma covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. Dorothy stood still, her expression a mix of disbelief and validation. "You created a system to steal from the very people who trusted this company," Keanu continued, his gaze fixed on Vince. People who needed this job to survive. Vince tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. Sir, I can explain, you will, Keanu said, cutting him off. But not here. He paused, letting the silence settle before delivering the final blow. Because as of this moment, you're terminated. The words landed heavy. Final. Irreversible. Tyler took a step back instinctively. You too, Keanu added, looking directly at him. Effective immediately. Panic fully set in now. You can't do this, Vince snapped, his mask finally breaking. I built this place, no, Keanu said firmly. You took advantage of it. He gestured toward the staff. They built this place. And you exploited them. At that moment, two members of the corporate team stepped forward. Not aggressively, but with authority. Security is waiting outside, Rebecca said calmly. You'll be escorted out. Vince looked around, searching for support, for control, for anything that could stop what was happening, but there was nothing left. The system he had relied on was gone. Exposed. Broken. Tyler looked like he might collapse. As they were escorted toward the door, the room remained silent, every eye watching, every person processing what they had just witnessed. And then, something unexpected happened. Ben stood up slowly from his booth. And he started clapping. Once. Twice. Then louder. Stronger. One by one, others joined in. Customers. Staff. The sound filled the diner, not just applause, but release as months, maybe years of frustration finally breaking free. Emma stood still, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. Dorothy closed her eyes briefly, as if letting go of a weight she had carried for too long. James stood quietly, but for the first time, there was no fear in his expression. Just relief. Keanu looked around the room, taking it all in, not as a victory, but as a responsibility. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the moment everything changed. The morning after the confrontation felt completely different inside Second Chance Diner #14, like the building itself could finally breathe again. And as sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating a space that had once felt tense and divided, there was now a quiet sense of relief spreading among the staff. Even though uncertainty still lingered in the air, because while the problem had been exposed, the future was still unclear until Keanu Reeves walked back through the doors, not as a hidden observer this time, but openly, calmly, and with a purpose that everyone could feel. The entire team had been asked to gather before opening, and they stood together now, some nervous, some hopeful, all waiting to hear what would come next. Keanu stood in front of them without notes, without a script, just looking at each of them as individuals rather than employees, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a sincerity that immediately changed the tone of the room. What happened here, he began, was a failure, not just of management, but of the system I created. That alone caught them off guard, because they hadn't expected accountability from someone at his level. I trusted processes that should have protected you, he continued, and I didn't look closely enough to see that they weren't working. No excuses, no deflection. Just truth. Emma stood quietly, her hands clasped together, her heart still racing from everything that had happened the day before. Dorothy listened with her eyes slightly lowered, while James stood near the back, alert but calmer than usual. But starting today, Keanu said, his tone firming slightly, that changes. And this time, those weren't just words. The first change came immediately. Every dollar that was taken from you, he said, will be returned. A ripple moved through the group. Some exchanged glances, unsure if they had heard correctly. Not just returned, he added, but compensated. Rebecca stepped forward with documents, explaining the details clearly. Every employee affected by the tip manipulation would receive full reimbursement based on verified records, along with additional compensation for the damage caused. For Emma, that meant thousands of dollars, enough to cover months of missed income. Enough to breathe again. When she realized what that meant, her eyes filled instantly, and for the first time since Keanu had met her, she didn't try to hide it. Dorothy received even more, the years of quiet loss finally acknowledged, finally repaid. She held the document in her hands as if it might disappear, her fingers trembling slightly. This can't be real, she whispered. But it was. And for James, the changes went beyond money. You deserved support, Keanu said to him directly, not humiliation. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look. We're arranging full medical support, he continued, therapy, treatment, anything you need. James didn't respond immediately. He just nodded slowly, his jaw tightening slightly as he fought to keep control of his emotions. Because for someone who had been treated like a problem, being treated like a person again meant everything. But Keanu wasn't finished. Because fixing the past wasn't enough. He needed to protect the future. From now on, he said, addressing the entire team, every tip, digital or cash, will be tracked transparently. Rebecca explained the new system, one that allowed employees to see exactly what was earned and where it went, removing any possibility of manipulation. No more hidden processes, Keanu added, no more control from one person. There would also be a direct reporting line to corporate, bypassing local management entirely, ensuring that no complaint could be buried again. For the first time, the staff realized something powerful, they would finally have a voice. Emma looked around the room, seeing the same realization in others, and something inside her shifted. Not just relief, but hope. And then came the moment no one expected. We also need new leadership here, Keanu said. The room tensed slightly. Someone who understands what this place is supposed to be. He paused, scanning the group before his eyes settled on Emma. Emma, he said. She froze. You've been doing the work of a leader for a long time, he continued. Without the title. Without the authority. Without the recognition. She shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. I don't know if I can. You already have, Keanu interrupted gently. Now you'll just have the support to do it properly. The offer hung in the air. Assistant manager. Real authority. Real change. Emma's eyes filled again, but this time, it wasn't just from pain. It was from possibility. Slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said softly. And in that moment, something changed, not just for her, but for everyone watching. Because they saw what fairness looked like. What recognition looked like. What leadership should look like. The meeting ended, but no one rushed away. Conversations began quietly, emotions surfacing, the weight of everything finally lifting. Dorothy sat down for a moment, something she hadn't allowed herself to do in years during work hours, just breathing, just existing without pressure. James stepped outside briefly, the fresh air hitting differently now, lighter somehow. And Emma stood still, holding the paper in her hands, knowing that everything she had been struggling for had just changed in a single moment. As the diner opened later that morning, it felt like a completely different place. Not because the walls had changed, but because the people inside them finally felt seen. Finally felt valued, and as Keanu watched from a distance, he knew this wasn't just about fixing one location. This was about making sure something like this could never happen again. Because a system built on fairness only works if someone is willing to protect it. And now, he was paying attention. 6 months later, Second Chance Diner number 14 no longer felt like the same place. It wasn't the same place, and anyone who walked through those doors could feel it instantly, not because of expensive renovations or flashy upgrades, but because of something far more powerful, dignity, respect, and a sense of fairness that had once been missing but was now built into every corner of the restaurant. And as Keanu Reeves stepped inside once again, this time without disguise and without a corporate entourage, he paused for just a moment, taking it all in like someone seeing the result of a promise finally fulfilled. The morning sunlight streamed through spotless windows, reflecting off clean tables and polished floors, but what stood out most wasn't the environment, it was the people. Emma moved confidently across the floor, no longer rushing in quiet desperation but leading with calm authority, her presence grounded, her voice steady as she guided the team through the breakfast rush, and when she noticed Keanu at the door, her face lit up instantly, not with shock this time, but with genuine happiness. "You're back," she said, walking over with a smile that no longer carried exhaustion behind it. "I had to see it for myself," he replied warmly, glancing around. "Looks like you've been busy." Emma let out a small laugh. "We all have." And it was true. The change hadn't come from one person, it came from everyone finally being given the chance to work in an environment where effort was recognized and honesty mattered. As Keanu took a seat at the same booth where his journey had started, he noticed a small digital screen near the counter displaying real-time tip distribution, clear and visible to everyone. A simple but powerful reminder that transparency was no longer optional, it was standard. "Systems working?" he asked casually as Emma poured his coffee. "Perfectly," she replied. "Everyone knows exactly what they earn now. No confusion. No tension." And that alone had changed everything. The quiet resentment that once existed between staff members was gone, replaced by teamwork, because when fairness becomes the foundation, competition turns into cooperation. Across the room, Dorothy moved between tables with a relaxed confidence that hadn't been there before, her shoulders no longer weighed down by stress, her smile genuine, her energy steady, and when she spotted Keanu, she made her way over without hesitation. "Well, if it isn't our favorite undercover customer," she said with a playful grin. Keanu chuckled. "I think that story's going to follow me forever." "Good," Dorothy replied. "Some stories should." She leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice just enough. "I paid off the last of Harold's medical bills last month." There was a quiet pause, but this time, it wasn't heavy, it was peaceful. "That's incredible," Keanu said softly. Dorothy nodded, her eyes shining. "For the first time in years, I feel free." And that word, free, carried more weight than anything else said that morning, because for so long, she hadn't been working to live, she had been working just to survive. Not anymore. In the kitchen, another transformation was just as clear. James stood at the grill, focused but calm, moving with precision instead of tension, the constant edge he once carried now replaced by something steadier, something healthier, and when he stepped out briefly to deliver an order, he caught sight of Keanu and gave a respectful nod. "Good to see you, sir," he said. "How's everything going?" Keanu asked. James paused for a moment before answering, "Better than it has in a long time." And he meant it. The support he had received, the therapy, the understanding, the simple act of being treated with respect, had done something no paycheck ever could. It gave him back control over his life. It reminded him that he wasn't broken. He just needed the right environment to heal. As the morning continued, the diner filled with regular customers, many of whom had witnessed the chaos months earlier, and now they returned not just for the food, but for the atmosphere, for the feeling that this place stood for something real. Among them was Ben Harper, walking in with his usual steady pace, his sharp eyes scanning the room before landing on Keanu. "There he is," Ben said, sliding into the booth across from him. "The man who turned things around." Keanu shook his head slightly. "I didn't do it alone." "Maybe not," Ben replied, "but you made sure it happened." And that was the difference. Because leadership wasn't about control, it was about responsibility. As they sat there, watching the diner operate with a rhythm that felt natural and fair, Keanu's thoughts drifted briefly to his mother, to the lessons she had given him without ever realizing how far they would reach, and for a moment, he imagined what she would think if she could see this place now, not just a business, but a reflection of everything she had believed in. Emma returned with his breakfast, placing it in front of him with a small smile. "French toast," she said. "Still the best in town." Keanu looked at the plate, then back at her. "Some things don't need to change," he said. And she understood exactly what he meant. As he finished his meal and prepared to leave, Emma handed him a small wrapped frame. "From all of us," she said. Inside was a photograph of the entire team standing together outside the diner, smiling, really smiling, and beneath it, a simple message, "Thank you for seeing us." Keanu looked at it for a long moment, his expression softening. Because that was what this had all been about. Not just fixing a system. Not just exposing corruption. But seeing people. Really seeing them. Their struggles. Their effort. Their worth. As he walked toward the door, he paused one last time, looking back at the restaurant that had once been broken, and was now whole again. Not perfect, but honest. And that was enough. Outside, the world moved as it always did. Busy, unpredictable. Full of places where stories like this might still be unfolding unseen. His phone buzzed with a new message. He read it, then slipped the phone back into his pocket without hesitation. Because this wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning. As he stepped into his car, one thought stayed with him. Simple, but powerful. The way people are treated when no one is watching is the truth of who we are. And from that day forward,